Welcome everybody up there on Zoom. We are getting ready to start our workshop for today. Kathy Doyle is here and she's going to be talking to you about losing your lawn or shrinking your grass and putting in more native plants and why you should do it. She is has a lot of experience and a lot of education in this area, so I'm hoping she can give you some good advice that you can use to shrink your own lawn. So take it away, Kathy.
All right, thanks, Debbie. Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody in the room. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
As Debbie said, I'm Kathy Doyle. I've been a master gardener since 2019, and I have earned my ecological gardening certificate from Mount Cuba. And I periodically do these workshops. And as I'm putting them together, I always learn more and more. And then I stuff more and more into my presentations, and then I have to try to prune them a little bit. So the first half of my presentation will be sort of making the case for why we want to lose our lawns, or at least shrink our lawns. And then the second half will be more about why we might want to consider replacing them with native plants. And then a few how-tos. I don't get as much into the how-to as I eventually would like to, but hopefully everybody will leave today's workshop having learned something new that they can do with their property. Okay, so currently about 40 million acres of our country consist of lawn, and about 20 million acres of our country are national parks. So we'll be making an argument a little bit later about turning your own property into your own little national homegrown park. But that's a lot of land, that's a lot of lawn. And lawns have been with us for a pretty long time, although they didn't become a real cultural, I don't know, thing for Americans until post-World War II. Before that, the only people who had lawns really were the very wealthy. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington imported lawns from Europe. You know, in Europe, they had the kings and queens had lawns, and lawns were not mowed by lawnmowers. Scythes were used by servants and slaves to cut those grasses down, or they had grazing animals, and it was a sign of their wealth. So, but in the 1950s, a family named the Levitts, they created these developments, and they were called Levittowns. And weekly, people would receive a little newsletter telling them how to take care of their lawns and what was the latest weed killer and what was the latest, greatest fertilizer. So starting around the 50s, lawns became kind of a status symbol. And that's kind of stayed that way since then. And I'm going to make the argument that maybe it's time to move towards a different way of thinking about our property and thinking about what is beautiful. And I'm going to kind of couch it in terms of, once upon a time, we didn't know what we didn't know. And we know a lot now about the harm that the way many of us treat our lawns has caused our watersheds, our soil, our insects, and our birds. So for example, we used to dump our trash in rivers. We didn't have trash collection, so we just dump it in the rivers. We used to over-till the soil and plant the same crops over and over again, and then destroyed the soil. We used to line our children's bedrooms with DDT-laced wallpaper to keep the mosquitoes out. Mm-hmm. We used to think that it was a really sexy thing to smoke cigarettes, and you could also be fit while you smoked your cigarettes. We didn't really know what we didn't know, but we know better now. So lawns are the most irrigated crop in the United States. They do not replenish the soil. They do not feed birds or insects except Japanese beetles. They require lots of chemicals to kill weeds and insects, and they require lots of chemicals to keep them green. And this is a quote by an author named Margaret Rankel in her book, The Comfort of Crows, where she writes, "So much life is imperiled by what is merely fashionable, a green lawn, a tidy yard." Now, this is not intended to be an anti-lawn presentation. There are very necessary uses of lawns. If you have a swing set, and children who want to play in the yard, you're going to have a lawn. If you like to sit in the lawn and have a cocktail or a cup of coffee, you want a place where your feet are not sitting in, bushes. You want a lawn. Maybe you want some pathways through your property, so that could be lawn. Or maybe you have an adorable little dog like I do, and your dog needs lawn to do her business. That's Tabby, by the way, 4 years ago. So I'm arguing that it's time to reimagine our landscape aesthetic, what it is that we find to be beautiful, attractive. I won't tell you where I took these pictures. I'll just say they were taken locally in a development. And these are sort of traditional ways developers will plop down bushes around a new development. And while many would see this as decorative and perhaps tidy, I would argue that it's also lifeless. And it's not, it takes work to keep these shapes. All of these mulched beds need to be weeded. None of these are native bushes, and they often require a certain amount of care to keep them healthy that more native choices might not require. And I would argue that that approach to landscaping is also harmful, or at the very least, not all that helpful. So, probably everybody has had experience with vinca. I've planted it. English ivy, I've pulled lots of it. Japanese pachysandra, I've planted lots of it. Tree of heaven, I'm happy to say I've never planted that. That's the host plant for the Japanese lanternfly, but that was a common bush that developers would put on your property. And the good old Bradford pear, we still have a bunch of them in our neighborhood. If you drive up and down Route 1, you'll see Bradford pears just finished blooming. They look very beautiful, and they are highly invasive. And none of them were planted. They just got there. The birds brought them. So this is what becomes of some of these plants that used to be purposefully planted. They escape, right? They were well behaved at one point and they escaped. So English ivy makes a mess of trees as it climbs up and smothers them. They grow big berries if you let the ivy grow long enough, and then the berries the birds eat, and then they spread it. Privet does the same thing. We had a nice privet hedge in our last property, and if it's allowed to keep growing, the berries grow, the birds eat it, and it becomes an invasive plant. Phragmites, that's the grass that we see all along the wetlands now. It's not native. It has smothered all of the native grasses, which are what a lot of our native insects and birds sort of rely on. It's here to stay. That's just not going away. So the good news about Phragmites is it does at least help prevent some soil erosion into the rivers. So it's not completely horrible. Everyone should have picked up or received online a list of the current list of invasive plants. In 2022 in Delaware. A group of botanists and other experts had been studying what has escaped into our wildlands and what has become impossible to control. And they created a list of invasive plants that no longer may be sold at local nurseries. And it's strongly recommended you don't swap them, dig them up and swap them out with people at plant swaps. So you have that list. It's kind of surprising some of the things you'll see on it. Like you're going to see daffodils on that list, which made me sad when I saw it. But I can see when I look out at our backwoods, no one planted those daffodils. I guess the squirrels did, but they're just everywhere. I guess the good news about daffodils is they're not very hard to pull out. But anyway, you can't buy these things anymore. So just that's part of the point of understanding why this list has been created. A number of states have created these lists. So no one's coming to your house and saying you've got daffodils, I'm going to arrest you. So people ask me that question sometimes. If you have these things on your property, you're not in trouble. You just can't buy more in Delaware. Probably most of you are already familiar with this, but just in case. So invasive plants that are on this list, they are not native. They grow quickly, they spread to the point where they disrupt other plant communities. So those Bradford pears that are just every year, there's twice as many along Route 1. No native trees can squeeze their way through those. So they are just making it impossible for native trees to grow along Route 1. Aggressive is the word we use for native plants that tend to be kind of thuggish. They like to move quickly. They're not considered invasive. It's two different terms. And then native plants are plants that have basically evolved over thousands and thousands of years, evolved with insects and birds. So they've co-evolved so that they feed each other. And so when we're talking about Delaware native plants, they might be plants that are the same plants that are native east of the Mississippi. Or it might just be plants that are native to the mid-Atlantic region. Or it might even just be plants that are native just to the coastal area of Delaware. So kind of knowing what your location is and what it is you're looking for is helpful when you're trying to figure out what's the best native plant for your property. The problems with the old way, with just, beautiful green lawns and all lawn is, or those, little meatballs that developers like to plop down on your property, is that the formerly well-behaved plants have become invasive. Our population is always growing, and the demand for housing has led to a loss of more habitat and therefore more lawn acreage. And when you have increased development, that means the soil is degraded and the water quality is also degraded. And coinciding with, the Levittowns of the 1950s, so the last 75 years, there's been just a startling decrease in insects and birds. I even remember when I was a kid, we'd be driving the back roads and the windshield was just always splattered with insects. And that just doesn't really happen anymore. So now that's not the only proof of a decline in insects. There's been lots of studies, but it is something that I've noticed in my lifetime. Here's just some studies. 40% of insect species are in decline. And there's just been just dozens and dozens of research papers written on this in the last decade. We need our insects. A lot of people say, I don't like bugs. But if we got rid of all of our bugs, then we would get rid of all of our flowering plants. We'd get rid of most of the food that we eat. And we would eventually go the way of the dinosaur. We need our insects. They pollinate 35% of the world's food crops. They pollinate 75% of the world's flowering plants. They create natural pest control. They recycle nutrients into our soil. They support a healthy ecosystem. And many provide valuable materials like honey or silk, for example. And insects are what our little baby birds need to eat, and some of our grown-up birds. So this is a quote from Doug Tallamy, who is an entomologist. He's a professor at University of Delaware who is world-renowned and has done numerous studies and talks about the decline of insects and birds in North America and even throughout the world. And one of his studies concluded that 96% of North American terrestrial bird species, so we're not talking about shore birds, but all the other birds, rely on insects for part of their diet. And you take one little pair of breeding chickadees, a mama and a papa, and they need to find between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to just rear one clutch of young. That's a lot of caterpillars.
Some busy birds.
So if you've noticed your properties don't have as many birds as maybe they used to, it's probably because they don't have as many insects as they used to. And they don't have as many insects as they used to for a lot of different reasons. So, and that's the correlation that Doug Tallamy writes about. He's written a number of books. At the end of my presentation, I have some of them on a slide. People who are here, I've put a bunch of books along the front of the room. But there has been about a 50% reduction in population sizes for many of Delaware's bird species. I think we can move that up to about the last 60 years, and we can probably move that reduction size up as well. And there are lots of causes, right? Industrial agriculture. I'm not going to talk about that. Climate change. Maybe talk a tiny bit about that. Light pollution, just a quick word about that. Replace all your outdoor lights with yellow lights. They don't attract the moths and the butterflies. Or put your lights on timers if you can, or just turn off your lights at night. And we'll talk about insecticide misuse and overuse. I will talk about habitat loss, and I will talk about non-native plants. So these are all causes for the decline of insects and therefore the decline in birds as well. Pesticides. So one of the major causes is that pesticides are used everywhere now. That wasn't the case 60 years ago. Your average homeowner didn't have a mosquito sprayer coming to get rid of the mosquitoes on their property. Right, that's a new thing. Food is genetically modified to have corn and soybeans to have insecticides built into them. We're still finding evidence of DDT in fish tissue in Delaware, and DDT was banned in 1972. And there are ongoing lawsuits against Monsanto, who is the corporation that created Roundup. And Roundup is an insecticide. Very controversial, that whole issue. But pesticides have been a problem. And at the end, I have a little bit about, well, how do you deal with mosquitoes if people are interested? But I don't want to get, I can get carried away about that. But know that the mosquito spraying companies, when they promise you they're only killing the mosquitoes, that is not true. They are killing every single pollinator on your property. And they're not killing the larva of the mosquito. They're killing the adult mosquitoes. And little larvae, they're going to be born in 2 days. You just got to bring those sprayers back. So there's better ways to deal with mosquitoes. Unless we were having, this scourge of malaria. That's a whole different thing. And fortunately, we are not having that scourge here. We use 85 pesticides that are outlawed in other countries. That's concerning. Yeah. We need this biodiversity. It's a little bit like the game of Jenga. You pull out, one species disappears and a lot of others come tumbling down and they also disappear. I don't say much about bees here, but because Debbie's here and she's our resident bee expert, I do just want to point out that honeybees are not the only bees to care about. And in fact, they're not even native, but we still love them. But we have 4,000 native bees to this country. The native bees are the ones that do most of the pollination. Most of them are solitary. They live in the ground. And so whatever we pour onto our lawn kills our native bees. And when you're talking about planting different kinds of plants on your property, since we've got all these different species of native bees, lots of different kinds of plants would be really beneficial for the various different kinds of bees. They have different little noses, no tongues, no whatever they're little. But anyway, gets the pollen and the nectar and the pollens from their body. But anyway, I digress. Habitat loss. This is an old statistic. About 175 acres of farm and ranch land get lost every hour. And it's typically it's typically to build new developments. You get new developments, you get these lawns, you get fewer trees, fewer native plants. More lawns, more chemicals, more runoff, fewer insects, fewer birds, degraded topsoil, degraded water. A little bit about topsoil. Who knew that dirt was so important? And in the master gardening world, dirt is a dirty word. We use the word soil. And this was an article from the National Geographic. History is littered with the remains of civilizations that ignored, exploited, and degraded the soil beneath their feet. We need to take better care of our soil, and we do not take good care of our soil. We need it because it grows. So 95% of the food is grown in the uppermost layer of soil, which is the topsoil. And that makes it one of the most important components of our food system. Without topsoil, the Earth's ability to filter water, absorb carbon, and feed people plunges. And when there's a new development, they come in, they scrape away all the topsoil. They got to level the land to build the house. And then they bring in a bunch of construction soil. It's crappy soil. It's really hard to get things growing, but there are ways to amend your soil through compost and feeding it in certain ways that aren't bad for the watershed. But new developments can be tough, and there are so many new developments, and so it's affecting our habitat for insects and birds, and it's affecting our topsoil and our water quality. So talk a little bit about watersheds. One of the most important reasons to lose the lawn is to remediate our watersheds. So when it rains, the rain comes pouring off our roofs, down our driveways, and it just pretty much slips right off our lawn and goes right into the street, down into the stormwater drains, and then it finds the nearest river. Now, I will say lawn is better than asphalt. So lawn catches some of that runoff, but if we've had a period of drought followed by one of those, crazy rainstorms that just pummels the earth, that rain just slides right off into the stormwater drains. So what we plant on our property can stop that and can clean some of that water and can improve our watersheds. We all live in a watershed. We are in the St. John's watershed, which is number 18. And here's number 18. This shows you how polluted the different watersheds are. The St. John's is the most polluted watershed in the state, and Delaware has the most polluted rivers in the country. So that makes St. John's watershed possibly the most polluted watershed in the country. Now, I say that to shock you. We do have highly stringent testing in Delaware. We test our water because we want it ultimately to be fishable, swimmable, and drinkable. And a lot of states don't include drinkable, so their standards are a lot lower for what is clean water. But I think it's great that Delaware has as a vision to someday have our rivers clean enough that we can swim in them and drink from them. The St. John's River has gotten in better shape. Used to be you could eat one 8-ounce fish serving per year from that river. Then it went up to 2, and now they're talking about raising it to 12. That's improvement. Less DDT in our fish, less mercury, and so on. But having said all that, our waterways are impaired. Our watersheds are impaired, and a lot of that has to do with how we're treating our individual properties. So overuse of fertilizers and pesticides, stormwater runoff, old wastewater infrastructure, and St. John's, of course, is where the capital of Delaware was founded, and we had all this old industry that just dumped all their stuff into the St. John's River. And we have 2 Superfund sites in Dover. So we got some cleaning up to do. And what we do on our property can help with that. Okay, if I bummed people out, you're all freaking out. All right, now we'll get into the happier stuff. Things we have some control over. So we can choose what we're going to plant on our property. We can choose how we treat the insects on our property, how we treat our soil, and the quality of the water that leaves our property. So just, a lot of people think, well, we've got all these protected lands. Isn't that good enough? Well, this is a map of all the protected lands in our country. And that's not enough. I mean, the West Coast is a little better shape than the East Coast. So this is where Doug Talmy has his idea of this homegrown national park, where, the national parks are too small, too separate from each other to really preserve our native insects and our native birds. They need more places to live. So this idea of, every individual homeowner or even renter who puts containers out on their balcony can bring back our insects and bring back our birds. And here's where we talk about native plants. So they're superheroes. Every time I do a presentation, I always keep this slide. They come in all different colors, shapes, and sizes. They can help save birds, bees, butterflies, soil, and even watersheds. So here's just a really stark illustration that I've also used before. Non-native plants tend to have pretty shallow roots, and grass, which is the turf up there, has like barely any roots. And when you have native plants, they have very deep roots. And deep roots means that you don't need to water them very much, if at all, because those deep roots can tap into the moisture that's way down in the soil. The deeper roots also help. So native plants can withstand periods of drought. They can prevent soil erosion because they hold the soil in place. They can absorb and cycle more nutrients through the soil. And as those roots kind of die and new roots grow, then you've got more organic material filling the soil. So it's just good stuff. If you dig up your turf, you're going to probably find the soil is kind of meh. There's nothing rich to it. But if you dig deep down under some of these native plants, you're going to find some really lovely soil that things can grow in. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these things, but when you're getting ready to start, when you're thinking, okay, I'm convinced, I'm going to add more native plants, I'm going to lose some of my lawn, you want to consider the size of your property and your vision. I heard one story of a woman, she had English ivy everywhere. She was around 70 years old. She hired folks to just tear up all that English ivy, and then she didn't know what to do. And once you've left this area bare, weeds are just going to come up. So I would recommend know your energy, know your budget, know your property, and don't get too carried away right away. Maybe you want to just start with containers and see if those beautiful butterflies are going to show up to your property. Maybe you want to start with just let's add a bed to the lawn, or maybe increase a bed. Maybe you want to go for it and try and grow a meadow. And meadow is going to grow in a sunny spot on your property. There are rules to growing meadows. I'll say a little bit about that. Maybe you live in a place that used to be a forest and there's still a lot of trees. So maybe you want to just extend your forest. You can grow a forest in 10 years. So that's something to consider. I will talk about keystone plants. What are the best plants to consider putting where lawn used to be? You'll need to do basic gardening skills, like where's my sun? How well does the soil drain? What is the soil's pH? You can get soil tests. We can talk about that if you want. You're going to want to know your planting zone, and I'll mention that briefly. Read books, explore public gardens, take classes, maybe spend some money hiring a designer who can come in, and you might have to spend $100 or $200 for someone to come and study your property and say, this probably would work. And then you can maybe do the work yourself if you can't visualize it yourself. You know that you might have picked a great native plant, but if you don't put it in the right place, then it's not going to thrive. So right plant, right place. And maybe you want to garden the way I do. You buy 2 or 3 plants, stick them somewhere where you think they're going to do well. And then if they do, then next year, throw some more there. It's kind of an expensive way to do it sometimes. Now, whatever you do, before you start digging any holes, call Miss Utility. You do not want to be tearing into gas lines or cutting off your electricity. So I do want to say a word or two about Lepidoptera. So that's the fancy word that covers moths and butterflies, all the moths and butterflies. And when moths and butterflies are little babies, they're larvae, and that means they're caterpillars. And that's what our baby birds do. So remember, the one little clutch of baby chickadees need between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars before they can fly away. So ideally, you plant things on your property that attract these caterpillars, where the butterflies will lay their eggs, where the moths will lay their eggs. They're not going to tear up your plants, and they're going to provide food for food for the birds. So Lepidoptera become sort of an important point that I'll continue to make. Like in this slide, keystone plants, this is a phrase that Doug Tallamy has really kind of coined. They're the plants that if we don't have them, just like that keystone in the ancient arches or even today's arches, if that keystone is missing, things topple. The ecosystem falls to pieces. So the keystone plants are what are going to bring things back for us, strengthen our ecosystems. So an oak tree is a keystone plant. It can support 557 different Lepidoptera species. So if you've got space for an oak tree or two, you are going to have lots of birds coming to visit you. Eucalyptus trees are very popular in California. They're not native. They were brought here in the 1850s, and they support one Lepidoptera in California. In Australia, where they're native, they support 48 species of Lepidoptera. So it's not that eucalyptus trees are bad trees. It's just that they're not native to here, and so our insects have not evolved with them. So our birds, therefore, go hungry if that's what we've planted. Just a few examples. A lot of us have the Asian dogwoods on our properties. They're very beautiful. They're not invasive, but they support no insects. And the native dogwood supports 117 different Lepidoptera. And I know a lot of people are like, well, I don't want insects on my trees or on the bushes or on my flowers. But you know, if you went searching in this native dogwood, really looking, you're not going to see those little inchworms. You're not going to see them. Maybe they've made a few little holes in the leaves, but that's okay. That shows you there's life on your property. That's something to be excited about. I didn't know violets were so useful. I've always just seen them as a weed, and a weed is just a plant that's in the wrong place where you don't want it. But a lot of weeds are invasive. They've come here from other places. But violets are the host plant for this beautiful little moth called the Great Spangled Fritillary. So I'm not pulling my violets anymore. Yes, I'm ashamed I pulled violets. Everybody's got this handout, and this is a list that Doug Tallamy created. It's the it's the keystone trees and bushes and perennials that you might want to consider, and it shows you how many Lepidoptera each of those species supports. Our plant hardiness zone has changed a little bit. Delaware is considered in 7A and 7B, Northern Delaware 7A, Southern Delaware 7B. Sorry, that's actually old news. In 1990, Northern Delaware, so the lower the number, the colder the climate. So Northern Delaware was 6B, Kent was 7A, Sussex was 7B. Now, Northern Delaware 7A, Kent 7B, Sussex 8A. So what that means is plants that we used to be a little bit too cold for can now do okay as they're moving, as our weather's getting warmer. It also means some of our trees that are kind of at their southernmost limit, now that we're getting warmer, they're not going to thrive. So now it's going to take 10, 20, 30 years for that to really show an impact. But in the last 100 years, our temperatures have warmed by 2 degrees. There are predictions that the temperature, if we don't do anything about, our carbon consumption, then in 100 years, the best guesses based on the best evidence are that our temperatures could be as much as 10 degrees warmer. And if we're 10 degrees warmer, the white pine trees are gone. In fact, they're suffering now. So don't plant a white pine tree, not recommended, even though it's a native tree. But the oak trees they do great in Texas, Georgia. They do great all along the East Coast. They're probably going to be fine. But that is something that people are really watching carefully. What of our native plants are just suffering because we're getting warmer and we're getting droughtier, right? We have these massive rainstorms, and then we have these weeks and weeks of no rain. So that's also impacting the health of some of our plants. This map is created by the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they take all sorts of different kinds of data to produce that. And they've updated it. They update it about every 10 years. So as you're looking at your property, consider making any lawn like an area rug rather than wall-to-wall carpeting. If you're going to create beds, they are beautiful. They do require maintenance. Obviously, it all does. There's no such thing as a zero maintenance property outside. And so if you're going to do beds, the recommendation is that you plant things as close together as you can. Don't give there any space. Let there be space for any weeds to pop up. And then if weeds do pop up, you can't even see them. It's great. You don't even have to worry about weeding. It can be expensive, though, to do that, depending on the size of the bed. So in that case, you're putting the plants where you want them, and then you are going to use mulch, until next year we can plant more plants and then just mulch where there's no plants. Ideally, you just fill it all in. Meadows are not quite as simple as they seem until they are fully established. It's not a matter of just no longer mowing your grass. It could be in your backyard, maybe when nobody's going to see it, because otherwise in the front yard, you're going to start getting notices that you got to mow your grass. But, you can let your grass grow, and then you got to just pay attention and pull out all the invasive stuff. It's a lot of work to do it that way, but some people try to do it that way. I'll talk a little bit about meadows. Forests require patience, right? You're going to plant your trees and they're kind of little for a while. It doesn't look like a forest, but in 10 years, it's going to look like a forest. Here's just a few samples of what people have done. And all of these methods that I'm going to suggest negatively impact this season's ground nesting bees and other insects. There's just no way to not harm them. I'm sorry. So Toby is one of our master gardeners, and she did this. She hired this guy to just take the sod away. And this was quick. She was ready to plant a new garden the next day. And I didn't ask her what it cost. It probably cost a little bit of money to get him to do this. And he's rolled away the turf, and he's rolled away a bunch of little native bees and insects in that. And he's going to take it somewhere else, and maybe they'll be okay. I don't know. There's the cardboard sheet mulching, which is what we've generally done at our house. You need a lot of cardboard, and you probably don't want a massive space to do it. But cardboard, you want it to be good cardboard that's not dyed and glossy. And there's ways you can just leave the cardboard for 6 months and then pull it up and start your planting. Everything will have died underneath. You have smothered the insects underneath. Okay. You can lay the cardboard and just go ahead and pile it on with some topsoil and go ahead and plant stuff, pop some holes in and the cardboard will biodegrade. This is a pretty organic way of doing it. So do you have a question?
You said that we kill the bugs underneath, because I do the cardboard method. And when I go to pull the cardboard up, I notice all these worms and all these critters underneath the card.
So there's probably enough oxygen then for them.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. So maybe it's not as deadly as these other methods. Yeah. Some people resort to just heavy mulching. In fact, I just learned about this. I don't know who does it locally, but you can reach out to a tree company, and if they have just cut down a tree, they're always looking for places to send their wood chips. There's debate over should you plant right away. I would recommend you wait a year, but they will come and just pile up those wood chips, and you can move them to where you want, do 6 inches or so. And next year you've got soil underneath that's nice. The mulch has decomposed, and you didn't have to do anything more than that. Again, if it's heavy mulch, maybe those little critters can make their way up and not suffocate under that. I definitely discourage you from using landscape fabric. It is made with plastics and it does degrade. It doesn't biodegrade. And then you end up having microplastics in the soil. Very, very controversial approach is to use glyphosate. Glyphosate absolutely will kill anything, any insect that's in the area that you've sprayed. And it also, research is showing that it's pretty harmful to soil health. Why am I even bringing it up? I've attended 2 workshops in the last month done by native plant designers. And when they do massive swaths of property, they use glyphosate. They're experts. I wouldn't do it. I would prefer to do, you know, bit by bit of my property, but there are folks out there that use it. So I'm mentioning it so that you're not surprised if you see that. There are also still lawsuits going on about the impact on human health. They sell this stuff at, you know, your big box stores with tiny print on how to do it. And it's so important that you follow the instructions because this stuff is meant to kill. So if you're gonna ever use it, and I'm not saying there's never a reason to use an herbicide, but it's very applied. Like we have bamboo. We hack the bamboo. I have a paintbrush and I just paint that little trunk with glyphosate. I don't spray everything all over the place, so it just kills that plant. But you really have to follow the instructions. So I would personally recommend that consider the other approaches. Our friend Carla, who's a master gardener, shared with me her story and her pictures. This is a picture of her house when she first purchased it. It's along the St. John's River. And she really wanted to do something with that front in front of that wall. And she's a big native plant fan. So she started by tilling. And I'll tell you that in the last 10 years, tilling is kind of a no-no now, as it really destroys all the fungal networks that the soil has been building that creates the rich soil. But we didn't know what we didn't know. So she started tilling, and I think it was backbreaking. And she also realized that she didn't like that wall anymore. You know, it sort of curves around. It's hidden behind those bushes there. So it's my understanding that her husband bought her a pretty wall for her birthday. Look at that pretty wall. Extended it all the way to those arborvitae trees. And then she did crowd her plants, but she has said in retrospect, she wished she had crowded them even more because she really had a huge amount of weeds. And that's what tilling will do. It will just wake up all those weeds and here they come, popping out everywhere. So I'm not sure which approach she would have decided to use instead, but she did find that all the tilling, and then maybe not planting enough plants, even though that looks like a lot of plants. This is 2 months of labor, which is pretty amazing, I think. And then she put mulch between all the plants, but she did say she would have planted things even more closely. But it's gorgeous. These are just some examples of beds. You know, you lay cardboard down, and then you just stick the plants where you want them, and you watch them grow. So there's 2 beds from my house. There's a bed from a community garden downtown Dover. Unfortunately, we use the landscape fabric before we plant. So we're now paying for it as we pull little patches of landscape fabric out of that pathway. That's Mount Cuba, where they've replaced lots of lawn with caryxes, which are the big grasses, and ferns and all sorts of beautiful ground covers. This is, I just pulled this off of Adobe stock. What I love about it is that probably was a front lawn, and who wants to mow, you know, when there's a slope, and they planted things very closely, and now they can sit on their little porch and see all sorts of life in that garden. And you wouldn't even notice if there's a weed there. So that's a look that a lot of people like. This is something people will do and is highly recommended, especially as you plant new trees. Instead of using mulch around the base, plant a lot of plugs of little plants, because when those caterpillars are, after they've finished chewing their leaves, if the birds haven't caught them, they eventually make their way into that soil before they come out. And if it's hard mulch or, compacted soil, then they've got nowhere to go. So this is called green mulching. This is another picture that I got from Adobe stock. It's probably from the West, but the color scheme is beautiful. There is a variety there. Things are planted closely, so it's definitely a different look from a lawn. This is a this is a bed of mine by my driveway, which is out of control. I planted plants. That's my method, right? Let's just see what works. And I didn't realize every single thing I planted would get really big and bushy. And it doesn't actually require a ton of work. I do have to thin out some of these plants, and it is always swarming with butterflies and bees. And the bees are not going to hurt you, right? They are busy eating. They could care less about you. They're only going to bother you if you are trying to. If it's the female that will sting you, and it's if you are coming out her nest. So, or if you're being aggressive to her. Doug Talamy insists he pets bees when he sees them. I'm not going to do that, but that's how harmless they are.
I have.
Have you? I love that. Maybe I will try. There's narrow strips of grass. That center picture is the alleyway in our old house where it's just this terrible, crummy, messy grass. And I just started planting these different native plants, Joe Pye weed and New England asters and goldenrod all the way along the fence. And it was just beautiful year round. And we never had to pay any attention to it. Didn't have to weed it. Sometimes I might cut things down. Sometimes I would just let them do their thing. Ferns are a lovely plant for a shady area where you maybe have never really been able to grow lawn. There's lots of ground covers to replace lawn. Ferns are beautiful. Fiorella cordifolia is also called foam flower. It's a really nice sort of for beds, I would say. We have a native pachysandra. It's Allegheny pachysandra. It's beautiful. It's the one in the bottom picture. It seems to grow anywhere. It doesn't only require shade. And so if you like the look of pachysandra, it's a pretty great ground cover. And then I've got these little ground covers, Chrysogonum virginianum, which is also called green and gold, which spreads nicely and seems to do okay in sun and in shade. And then the heuchera is always nice. So these are really more probably for big beds or for like strips of lawn. Yeah. Woodland phlox, moss phlox. One of these pictures is from Debbie. This is a lovely ground cover. It likes the sun, it likes the shade. Woodland one is going to like the shade a little bit more, hence its name woodland. Moss tends to be like a little moisture, but that's a really nice ground cover that I've actually seen people replace swaths of their lawn with phlox, which I think is a really interesting look. It's also really nice for beds. So meadows, I've never created a meadow. Mount Cuba has a whole chunk of their website devoted to how to grow a meadow from, step A to step Z, and what didn't go well for them and lessons they learned. And it is a process to get a meadow started. If you want to try to not have to deal with all of the invasive stuff that comes in, then you totally get rid of the lawn. And I'm not sure how they do that. They're pretty anti-chemical, but they will use it in certain situations. And then they use particular seed mixes that are mostly grasses, but with a few like flowering plants. The thing about if it's mostly flowering plants, those tend to be annual plants, or they tend to get crowded out by the grasses. So meadows ultimately, if allowed to really do their thing, ultimately are really mainly grasses. So you're just looking at higher grasses where the birds can feed and hide. I've not done a meadow, but if you're interested in trying to try a meadow, then you definitely check out the Mount Cuba website. And if you're going to do a meadow where your neighbors can see it, if you live in an HOA development, you're going to want to just be able to communicate what you're doing and why you're doing it. You want to make it look tidy by including maybe mowed strips around the meadow so that people can see that you care about it and it's not you just giving up on mowing your grass. You can put little signs there. So you want to sort of show that this is purposeful. So I intend to add to my forest. Right now I do have this dog. She's grown, so that's what she looks like now. And so she needs lawn. Now we do have a big patch of, I wouldn't really, you can't call it lawn. We have just a big patch of green stuff that she likes to dig in and do her business in. But this part of our house, there's moss there. There's a lot of bare soil. And so I see a lot of evidence of native bees there, which is fun. But my plan is to move this sorry looking rock. We've lived here 5 years. We haven't addressed this wall, but we're going to move that rock wall out beyond this I think it's a sweet gum tree and then a little hawthorn tree that I planted. We're going to move it all the way out. I'm just going to leave the leaves. And because there's really no grass there to speak of, after a year of just leaves, I'll be able to plant all sorts of things. So I'll plant some additional trees and some nice bushes. So that's my plan. I'm sorry, I don't have any after photos. We're gonna have to wait 10 years for that. I do know if you're going to be planting trees, this is just from the Arbor Day Foundation on what to consider when you're planting trees. How big are they going to get? How wide are they going to get? Keep them away from where the wires might be. Maybe not plant some, fragile tree right next to your house. Just, how far away they should be from the house. So you want to consider that. And there's so many beautiful trees that are native, our flowering dogwood, our redbuds. There's other kinds of dogwoods, southern magnolia, which just is, I love it so much, the scent of it. There's the big southern magnolias. There's the sweet bay magnolias that are a little bit, that are daintier, smaller, still produce lovely flowers. And the birds and the caterpillars love them. If you don't have room if you don't have a lawn to worry about, lucky you, but you want to bring some pollinators. These are just some container gardens from Mount Cuba. I never would have thought of planting an oak leaf hydrangea into a container or black-eyed Susans or heuchera, but or ferns, but these are all plants that can work really nicely in containers. And just some other things to consider as we're talking about changing our aesthetic and how we view things. Leave your leaves. Margaret Rankel's book, she's all about leaving the leaves. It will decompose. It's going to give beautiful nutrients back to the soil under your tree, where they'll be absorbed by the roots. And fireflies really need leaf litter too. The mother fireflies, this is where they lay all their eggs. And if you've got no place where there's nice leaf litter, you're going to see fewer fireflies. And over the winter, leave your stems, leave your buds. They're beautiful. They still provide food for the birds, and they also provide cover for them. And they just kind of a nice look. And if you see holes in your leaves, it's a cause for celebration. Don't spray. So, quote from Talany to sort of conclude: by shrinking your lawn and removing your invasive ornamentals, all actions a single person can take, you will be able to make a difference that you can see and enjoy almost immediately. Life will return to your property. So let's try to move away from harmful practices and an outdated aesthetic, because we know better. And here's some of the books that I used. And I'm open to questions.
Did you say you were going to talk about how to deal with mosquitoes without?
Life.
I don't know.
I'm so glad you asked. Yeah, so the most, all of our residential mosquito sprays are highly toxic to native pollinators, to bees, to butterflies. It is much more effective to get to the larva. And mosquitoes lay their eggs in water. And so I'll get to that in just a sec. So fun fact, mosquitoes really are important, even though we don't like them. But they give nutrition. They are food for spiders, bats, birds, fish, frogs, tadpoles, other mosquitoes, and dragonflies. So other pests that people consider pests, I don't, will eat these guys. So here is a Doug Tallamy again. He should pay me. Thing that he suggests. So this is what I do on my old property. We lived on State Street in downtown Dover. It was covered with English ivy. We got rid of all the English ivy, but we never got rid of the mosquitoes. We could never sit outside. I still don't understand it. This property is much more wooded where we live now. And I've used these methods and never am bothered by mosquitoes. Now, if I'm going to go out into our woods to be planting stuff, I do spray myself and, pull the socks up over my pants and so forth. But anyway, take a 5-gallon bucket. You fill it about, say, 2/3 or even 3/4 with water. And then you get yourself a bale of straw. And I still have a bale of straw that I bought 4 years ago. It makes a mess of my garage, but it's okay. And then just, fistfuls of straw, you just stick it into that container of water. You let it sort of, I don't know, if you want to do the straw first, let's say you fill the bucket up halfway with straw, and then you fill the bucket up with water. Let it sit for a day or two. It sort of ferments. And then you get one of these mosquito dunks. Is everybody familiar with mosquito dunks? They are fabulous. They truly do only kill mosquito larvae. And they've got Bacillus thuringiensis, if that means anything. BT is their chemical.
Yeah.
So like I will take a mosquito dunk, which you can order online. You can buy at any of the big box stores. And I'll just break it into like quarters, and I'll put a little quarter in my bird baths. Doesn't hurt the birds.
Okay.
I might stick a whole dunk into the bucket, and the mosquitoes there are drawn to water. So, and they smell the smell of the fermented, they like that, so they're going to find that bucket, hang out there, lay their eggs, and sorry, there go the eggs. The eggs are killed by this. So I have one bucket on one side of our house and one bucket on the other side. You do need to change it out about every 2 weeks. Says, whoo, will it smell bad after a couple weeks? And I pour the water out, and then it's a mess, but I do the straw. I'll just kind of leave by my compost pile until it dries out, and then I just stick it in my compost pile. So there's a little effort required. But for me, it's worth it. I spend a lot of time outside. We have a patio that's sort of in the woods, but it's near some outlets. I haven't done this, but if I needed to, could plug a couple fans in. Mosquitoes will not come to you when the wind is blowing. Yeah. So that's a nice, easy way if you've got access to electricity. And I have had luck I have big planters. I have 5 encircling my patio, and I do buy those mosquito plants, the citronella plants. Mm-hmm. I love them. They're not native, but I plant them, and I don't know if it's just a coincidence. Some people say, no, those don't work, but maybe that's why our patio doesn't have the mosquitoes, or maybe it's because of Doug Tallamy's suggestions.
Where do you buy those? Anywhere?
The dunks?
No, the citrus plant.
Oh, I'm not supposed to say places.
Any of the nurseries, Clark's, I've seen them all over. I can't remember
I
where,
just
but
never looked for them.
Amish nurseries will have them. Yeah, I have seen them in a lot of places.
Somebody else asked, what mulch do you recommend? I'm not sure what.
I've always been taught that you don't want to use any dyed mulch. I mean, there's no reason to use dyed mulch. I mean, some people have preference for colors, but I always use dyed mulch.
It's hard to find it not dyed nowadays.
Is it?
it can be.
Yeah.
There's certain big box stores that carry more varieties than others.
Huh.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Search online before you drive there thinking you're going to get it. They got a lot of cedar mulch. I've noticed that cedar is more popular of it. I've been on this hunt. But
cedar's lovely, but there's something about cedar that
makes your more acidic, right? Makes your soil more acidic.
okay, more acidic. And is that's the mulch you shouldn't put right up against your house because maybe the termites like it? But I think it's good for regular plants. I don't quote me on that. hardwood mulch that's not dyed, and I don't ever have trouble finding it. And I get delivered sometimes.
Somebody said they use leaf compost mulch, and somebody else said ARBORISTS wood chips.
Arborist wood chips.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about those, but
Like arborist wood chips, like if you see one of the arborists chopping up a tree, hey, come dump this load at my
Oh,
house.
okay.
kind of thing.
and again, I've heard it before that freshly ground up tree needs about a year to die. That if you use that, it can like burn up your plants. But just recently I was at a different presentation where they said they've actually not found that to be true. So I don't know. You decide. I would play it safe.
Maybe it depends on what kind of tree is being,
That's a good point.
Sure.
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good point.
We chip our own. I mean, we have a wood chipper, chip our own. Like my husband's a fanatic about cutting things down.
They all.
So he's like, makes the mulch with the wood chipper, and that's all we use is our own
Oh,
stuff.
that's nice.
Of course, I don't have a lot of spaces to mulch because I have a lot of ground cover and stuff. So if you don't need to mulch because you have plants there, then
That's the
you
goal.
know that.
That's the goal. Yeah, and leaf mulch is great if you've got it. That's usually what I try to use.
If it's tree mulch, do you have to like age it or anything? I mean, can you use it like right after the tree was chopped down?
Well, that's what I was just saying. I feel like I've heard one presenter say, don't use it right after it's been cut because it's still alive and it'll burn your plants. But and so let it sit for like a year and then you can use it. But another presentation I attended recently, they said, no, it'll be fine. So, you could try it. I would wait. I would let it season first. I don't know. Maybe somebody will research that further. Anybody else? Well, thank you, everybody. Did use sources. Here's some other places to find more information. I'll come back to that slide just to show you I didn't make all this stuff up. All right. Well, thanks. Thanks for being here.
Can I?
Oh, sure.
Has anybody gone to, last weekend I went to the Backyard Wildlife Native Plant Nursery in Townsend. Anybody go there?
I did last weekend.
They had a lot of native plants too. I was really impressed.
Yeah, he's a new business, just started last year, I think, and he had a lot of good stuff.
He said he's been there 2 years and he's really growing it. And he sells a lot of stuff up towards Middletown, but the farm is actually in Townsend, so it's close.
We have a copy of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, he has a Facebook page, which is how people communicate with him, apparently. So he's a small operation, sort of a man, a grandpa, a grandma, and the 2 grandkids that run it. It's very adorable.
A lot of it was plugs, and he said he was trying to get away from plastic pots, and it worked out fine. I just wish I had taken some soil and something in water, which they had there, but because I was going a couple of places and I was like, oh yeah, I have all these plugs.
Oh, they're
But
gonna
it
dry
worked
out.
out. They're all doing well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and reasonably priced.
Yeah, plugs are a great way to go if you can find them. That's inexpensive, instead of pots and pots to try to fill under your trees. If you can get a bunch of plugs to put under your trees, that's a great way to create the green mulch thing.
Somebody asked if they were gonna get copies of the presentation slides. Do you send those out?
So it's a lot of slides, but what I can do is I'm going to assume people are most interested in the second half, what to plant, how to do it. So what I can do is just sort of chop it in half, and then it's easier to send. It's easier for people to open, and maybe Debbie can.
Well, we went back and forth on this because, there's different ways of doing the PowerPoint. You can do like 3 slides per page, 6 slides per page. But still, if you're at home and you want to print it, you're talking about a lot of paper and a lot of ink. for if you want to print all those pages.
And if they want to review it, they could just look at the
Yeah.
recording maybe.
Whenever that comes out. The thing is also the sending through email, it's gonna have to be optimized, to go through email. So the file sizes are pretty big with all the images. So with the combination of a lot of slides and a lot of images and things like that, makes a presentation of this type, a little bit difficult to handle that way. But like Kathy said, she's willing to cut it back and do the pertinent slides of what you might want to know, so we could send that out and it'll be shorter. Because I'm telling you, if I send out 86 slides and people are going to print them at home, they're not going to be too happy about it.
No. And I think, and we would convert it to a PDF because I would.
Yeah, it's still,
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, it would be half the presentation that we could send out if people are interested in. So maybe I'll just list it.
So we'll figure that one out. And
That was your question too.
I was just gonna say, I was surprised because usually when you do come in, we have a
It
print.
just depends on what, yeah,
It depends on the presenter.
and it depends on the content of the slides. You know, it's like, I do animation in my slides.
Yeah.
So when you print it, you know, of course, it doesn't work right, especially if things are on top of each
Right.
other. So, you know, you gotta get around that somehow. But it just depends on what the presenter wants, you know, like when were you here with the native plants one?
Something came up and I
Okay.
had missed that.
Because with that one, it was effective to have the 3 slides on a page because you just had a picture of the plant and the name, and then there's
Right.
space at the sides where everybody could write down, you know, is this does this need a lot of water, or is this, how tall does this grow, and stuff like that. And that's the way she wanted to do it.
Right,
So that was, you know, you got to think about what's effective
Yes.
way of doing it.
right.
So there's that. So
I'll just. So this is a slide to just let people know that under the USDA, cooperative extension may not discriminate against anyone based on race, gender, political views, a whole number of important related beliefs. So we subscribe to that.